Right, so yeah, like I mentioned, this is just to go over our prioritization activity, looking at things from more of the front end perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to make this a little easier, which I forgot to do during the last session. All right, so I gave you a bit of an introduction just through Slack of what we were doing here, Zach, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. So to kind of start things off, what me and John did was we discussed kind of like from a high level view, like what themes we were going to focus on in global search for the upcoming quarters. And, based off of some changes in resourcing and what we're going to have available, and also because, we're getting a front end designer added to the team, this was kind of the initial order that we were looking at for some of the things we wanted to work on. So, starting with, front end redesign being one of the major things that seemed like a good opportunity for us to start digging into. General UX improvement, just things that we've been wanting to do that we haven't quite had the ability to get to quite yet. Global search non-code, this is just everything that's outside of the code scope within global search. And then code search, it was going to be like kind of a high priority for us this year, but since we've had a delay in some of the availability for adding some backend engineers, we decided to hold off on that a bit, at least on some of the bigger items. So that's kind of like a high level prioritization that we were looking at. And then what we did was we brought in some of the larger issues that we've been planning to do, and then essentially color coded them based off of these themes. And what me and John did was we essentially kind of stack ranked them in each category based off of both things we've heard from users, from feedback, either with like customer calls or things like user research. As well as we also took into account just like goals for our team individually, just because, things like kind of fixing some inconsistencies that we have in our product, or, doing some front end redesign that, maybe it won't initially add a ton of value, but as we begin to kind of transition to prepare for some of the things that we want to do, it's kind of needed. So we were looking at both, like I said, user value as well as kind of like business or our team value as well. So that was kind of where we started. And then what we did was we started to move all of these items over here onto this x-axis of this matrix that we have. And as you can see, we have, the y-axis is based off of level of effort. So higher level of effort goes up, lower level of effort is lower on the axis. And then on the x-axis is based off of that value that we were talking about. And so this is where we essentially combined all of these onto this x-axis with that stack ranking somewhat still intact. But since we're not really saying that we're going to focus only on front-end redesign first, we started to compare some of like the top items in each category and where we felt those belonged in this value axis. Cool. So that's where we essentially started with just placing them all on here. And then the next step was we met with the engineering team to start looking at effort for some of these. And so we essentially were moving them up or down based on that effort. And it was only focused on backend effort to begin with. And the goal was, once we felt good about that, we would then have you review things and then kind of essentially it's only going to be moving things up in value based off or up in effort based off of your feedback in terms of like, this is going to require a lot of front end effort, or, maybe this can stay where it's at because there's not much effort involved on the front end. And so that's kind of what we're looking to do here. I will say there's some things that are currently still on the x-axis here, and that's primarily things that they hadn't yet gotten to. We were kind of focusing more on this right hand side just because it's the higher value items and that we just didn't quite get to some of these. So, we can still, you're still, feel free to adjust those based off of front end effort for the time being if we get to them. But just know that we haven't really accounted for back end at this point in time. Okay. Does that all make sense to you?
Yeah, this is awesome.
Cool. So maybe we can start here going from kind of right to left. And just like I said, we're really kind of just trying to compare based off of other items on this matrix. So I know it's kind of hard to have like an exact measurement of like what you think the weight or effort of this is going to be, but we're looking for just kind of rough estimates of like, I think this is going to be a lot of effort, or, this, I don't think it's going to be as much work for the front end. So we can put it, lower on this matrix. So If you have a hard time with that, like I said, try and just compare them based off of other things that we have on here. And that's kind of how we're trying to do this. All right, so the first one that we'll kind of go over here is the scopes as vertical tabs. And I'll try and give you just a brief overview of these in case you don't have all the context on these. I think this one's fairly straightforward. Is we're planning to move the current scopes that are horizontal as tabs on the global search results page to more of a vertical orientation on the left-hand side, essentially kind of where we have the current filters or facets, which this will require. I'm kind of working with the Pajamas team right now to define a vertical orientation to our tabs component. And so this would probably entail creating that for our current tabs component as well as actually implementing it. So that's where it's going to probably require a little bit more effort on the front end side than maybe it would have been if we already had it built within the component.
Cool. Just another note here. As you mentioned, maybe comparing like two other things, like where the LOE goes.
Yep.
So for the group and projects, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but so the group and projects filters, those are already written in Pajamas. They're written in Vue, and they're like very easily moved over to that sidebar component. Yep. The scopes themselves are still written in Haml. They're not using our tabs component right now in the front end. Terry did have quite a lot of success getting that over. And then from what I remember, there were some routing issues that ended up causing a bunch of timeouts because of the way that we were doing that. That needs to be further investigated. A lot of that's written up on that issue, the like scopes to Vue component issue. If you, I can link that if we don't have that. So I guess what I'm saying is like they're comparing those two. There's definitely more complexity in this one than groups. So if anything, maybe this one moves up just a little bit. I don't think it will be too terribly hard, like as far as in GitLab UI, like especially if the designs are provided to make a vertical layout for the tabs. And then converting this into there, investigating the issue that Terry was running into when she tried to convert this the last time, and then actually doing the converting and moving to the sidebar component. So definitely, I think a little bit more complexity on this one maybe than where we have it.
Gotcha.
That would be my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of reiterate here, like a lot of these ones that are currently just we put way down at the bottom on terms of effort. It's because there's basically little to no effort, they said, on the back end side, or at least that was their expectation. And so that's why we put it way here at the bottom. So like if you think that this is going to be, more than this groups one, that's fair. Like I definitely see your point there, and I agree. But that doesn't mean like this groups one probably also needs to move up because there is some front end work to do with this one. So I wouldn't necessarily like start. What I would say is like when you're starting to do these ones on the right, use those as the reference. So like as we move left, use the ones that you've done on the right as kind of like the reference point of like the level of effort, if that makes sense.
Okay, then I would say then the inverse, that the moving groups and projects to the side filters is less complex than scopes to the vertical filters.
Okay, and then like for level effort, like how much, like if you were to say like this is very easy, like towards the bottom here, or like it's going to require a few days to do, or maybe even a week or a milestone, like where would you kind of put this at in terms of like the work to get this completed?
I wouldn't say it's like incredibly complex. I think that just making sure we get the routing done and then getting the component in GitLab UI. Besides that, it's not like, I guess, terrible. A couple days is probably like a good estimate. A couple like working hours, like days, not just, it could take a little bit longer with review cycles and stuff. I don't want to commit. I don't want to say it's only gonna take a couple days, but it would probably only be a couple days of development work to get this sorted out.
Gotcha. And then like that aspect of like making it as part of like a Pajamas component, do you see like a lot of work that is involved into that, or?
I don't think so. I'm not terribly familiar with, or extremely familiar with the GL tabs component, but I can't imagine it's going to be anything that is, groundbreaking by any means. It shouldn't be too bad.
Okay, so from your perspective, this being like maybe a couple of days of work estimating, I'd say like maybe like in the middle of this kind of quadrant makes sense. And then so based off of that, like you were kind of comparing the group and project filters, moving those, where would you place that in relation to that then? Like,
I think that is as simple as just literally moving the already built components to the sidebar component. So I would say very little complexity.
Okay, yeah, so
Yeah.
like I'd say essentially right around there, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's an easy one to do because, like I said, that's all pretty much coded already. It's just moving it out of the top bar and putting it into the sidebar.
Okay, cool, makes sense. So this next one, combination tab. So what this is talking about is we've had discussion of like an all tab or some sort of tab, which is like a combination of MRs, epics, issues, where a user can kind of see all of those in one result list versus having to go to each and every result list separately. So that's essentially what this one is talking about.
Yeah, I think that complexity solely lies on the back end. I don't really see much complexity on the front end, especially if we're already, we've already converted the scopes to the vertical tabs. We've converted the scopes to pajamas. At that point, it would just be adding an alt tab to that, which from a front end perspective is, a weight 0.
Okay.
I would say the only catch is that it ideally would be blocked behind the scopes in vertical tabs, just because part of that work would be converting it to view and getting it into the status where like an alt tab would be really easy because pajamas, the GL tabs component makes the alt tab easy for us.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would just be that the backend can handle that level of querying, right? So.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, I'll keep this one essentially where it's at, maybe up just a tiny bit, just because there's a little bit of effort, but all right, that sounds good. Language as a facet. So this one is for based off of code results and, adding the language as a facet. What would you kind of estimate as the effort for that one?
Again, I think a lot of that's going to lie on the back end. For us, that's just ensuring, I'm trying to remember. I don't think the code search has a sidebar component right now to put a facet, because I imagine that's what you mean, right? To put it like a facet in the sidebar for the language.
Yep.
If the backend's able to provide us the list of languages that we're going to show for a particular search, the complexity really just lies in expanding the sidebar to the code search, which is it's already built to work that way because that's how it works with issues in MRs. So I would say low complexity on the front end. Most of the complexity there is going to be on the back end. One, being able to tell us what languages to show as facets, and then 2, being able to handle us passing the back end a facet.
Okay. Cool. So I'll just move this up just a little bit, but around where it's at seems to make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't seem not much complexity on the front end.
Gotcha. My assumption is it's going to be similar for having epics available in advanced search. That one is one where, currently that one is not using Elasticsearch. And so I don't initially think there's a lot of front end work to go with this, but I might be mistaken.
No, so the epics tab is already there. It's the front end's pretty much, the front end just tells it, hey, epics, and then the back end tells us, the back end does all the work to provide the epics. So how the back end does that, whether if it's a basic search or advanced search, it makes no difference to the front end.
Okay, cool. So I'll just leave that one where that's at. Labels as a facet. I know this one's definitely going to require some front end work, so I wanted to get your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, so we could probably leverage some of the code that they use right now in the tokenized search, just in the way that they represent labels in that dropdown. The main thing though is how do we, the main thing is going to be how are we telling the front end what labels are searchable, right? Like, are we just going to allow them to search on any label that's because the scoping affects it too, right? So like if we're in a project, it's easy to know what labels are related to that project in that group. Same for the group. But when we're on if we're on an unscoped search, are we still going to allow it to be searched by labels?
So the idea of this one is we're going to be leveraging Elasticsearch aggregations. And so the options presented in this labels filter or facet will be only ones that are actually shown in the results. So
okay.
So I think that's partially handled by the backend, but I may be wrong. John, you can correct me if I'm mistaken on that, or CZ.
You're talking about delivering the list of labels, right? And the list order, the list order would be available based on what is in the search result set. Yep. So it wouldn't be, and that would come from advanced search. Yep. We wouldn't expect it some other way. It would not allow you to choose labels that aren't in the result set. That would be. It's not that we couldn't do that eventually. That's not where I'd start, though.
Yeah, that's our kind of first iteration.
So if we're talking, the backend is going to tell the front end, hey, this is the set of labels that you can search on. We take that data, we format it ourselves, we build a component. Yep, off the query. I would say we probably use a similar kind of component to what tokenized, not the same as tokenized search, mind you, but kind of that like type ahead drop down of the labels. Yep. A lot of that code can be leveraged already from Pajamas. We jam that list into that component and then we put that in the sidebar. So I don't really think there's a ton of complexity on the front end here. I think it's just, we already have the sidebar component built in Vue. We just put a new component in there for labels. We have the logic that says when labels can show up, i.e. if it's an Elasticsearch and there's a data set for labels coming from the aggregate of the advanced search. And then we just put that in there. And then when you select one, we put it in the query and pass it back to the backend. So again, I think all things considered, that should be pretty not super huge effort on the front end, just building a component and parsing data.
The few issues I'm not aware of and how we would solve them yet would be you can have labels that have the same name and potentially the same number, same color, but they're actually coming from a different project. And so there's a project hierarchy assumed with labels, or group hierarchy assumed with labels. And I don't know, because we can search across groups. So I don't know how we resolve that, or if the solution is something like you can't filter labels until you specify a group or something.
Like MVC or MVP for this would definitely feel like if we would only do it for like scoped searches, across only one project, it makes things a little tricky when we're talking about multi-selecting project and multi-selecting groups. But yeah, those are some of the questions. But at the end of the day, like if we're able to tell the front end the information it needs, then the front end's only job is really to parse the information, represent the information, and pass the information back to the front end when it's interacted with. So a lot of those decisions where it would be helpful to have, again, I don't think it changes the complexity too much on the front end.
Okay. So I assume the front end would have the logic on withholding it until you're in a scope search.
Yeah, if we wanted to add like that caveat, for sure.
Okay.
Because Elasticsearch will still have the label set. So if we wanted to add like that extra layer of like logic around when to show it, that would exist in the front end. Again, the front end is aware of these, like the front end is aware of the state it's in. So, that again isn't a lot of complexity. It's just more of like, hey, we have extra conditionals and extra business logic now in the front end. So we should just be aware that that's there, right?
Yeah, and I will say that we even have that issue that you were talking about, John, at the group level when searching based off of labels, like today in like an issue list, for example, where you could have the same label duplicated. And that's what it is today, is duplicated essentially in the listing. So it's not like we would be making something worse. It would at worst be like the same as it currently is today. I do have some ideas of how we could solve for that, but to Zach's point, like at least I'm hoping it's not going to change complexity a lot. And if it does, then maybe we start with the first iteration of just doing essentially what they do today on like groups, for instance, and at least making it so the labels are only available, at least having a group selected. You can't like do it at the global level.
Sounds good.
Another thing, I guess, Zach at the front end has to add is the displaying the labels, right?
Yep. Yeah, and so we would do that. We would leverage kind of some of the logic that tokenized searching is already doing with how you can label is and label like that drop down. Of course, it's going to be in a different type of component in our sidebar, but essentially like a lot of that is provided from GitLab UI and Pajamas. So it would just be building a component and putting it inside of the sidebar component that already exists.
So the labels showing in the search results.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So,
oh yeah, good point.
So labels aren't actually represented right now in the search results, are they?
Nope.
No.
So we would have to figure out representing that shouldn't be too hard. I mean, we have access to that, like the results cards essentially is what we're showing. We would just have to make sure that advanced search is also providing that data, and then we just represent it. So again, yeah, I think especially we already have like kind of, is if we can have a design like of how that looks. I don't really foresee that providing too much difficulty. It's more so on the back end to make sure to tell the front end like, hey, also show these labels.
Yep.
Yeah, and I picture it kind of looking, similar to how it's represented in tokenized search.
Yeah, exactly like exactly like what we have on like the issues list and something like that.
Yeah, and so something like this is would not be hard, especially the way we have, especially in this design, because it's at the very bottom of the card. That's just basically just adding a new container and just slapping the labels in there. And we are, the components that are built to represent labels already exist. So really, it's just us importing those shared components and representing the labels, and just double checking that the colors are proper and everything like that. But I think that all is contained in the label object. So I don't think it should be too much complexity, but it is a good note, CZ, to remember that we also need to update that, not just the facet.
Yep, absolutely. Good point, CZ. So are you thinking like, would this be days? Would this be weeks? Would it be like a milestone? Just trying to get like a ballpark here.
I don't think it'd be a milestone. I think it'd be less than a milestone for the front end. I think that especially if the back end is fully baked and is providing the labels, I think this is a couple days max.
Okay. All right, let's move it up just a bit then.
Just because we have to build the component and make sure everything is all set. But again, like when I say like building a component, that's as far as front end work goes, that's pretty run of the mill most of the time. So
gotcha.
It shouldn't be too bad.
Okay.
Especially with GitLab UI.
Yeah. Vulnerabilities and search, we're not going to be planning to do anything on the front end for this one. Initially, it's only going to be adding it to our index for another team to utilize. Doc search, that one we do plan on doing front end work once we index it. So this is essentially looking at eventually adding in the current docs to our index and being able to search for those within results in global search, and essentially having like a new tab probably specific to like documentation.
So if we have anything documented around like what the effort was like, because I think this was before I was here, but whatever the effort looked like for bringing epics into the search, like basic, or so epics is in, I guess, basic search right now. So if there's some issues that track like the effort that was required to bring epics into the search results, the effort is going to be pretty much the same for docs, at least on the front end.
Okay.
Because it's adding a new tab, adding a new results view, and that's about it.
The one thing is like epics will be able to essentially reuse like the issues and MRs, like essentially like layout that we currently have, versus docs is probably going to be like a new layout that we'll have to create. So I'm assuming that's what can add a little bit of work as well.
Yeah, I mean, it'll add work. With anything, when you're creating something new, it reduces the complexity because you're not having to worry about, other things that are using it. So like with epics, you had to make sure that you didn't affect issues in MRs. So it would just be creating a new component then, work, but not necessarily super complex work.
Okay.
I guess maybe another difference between the doc and epics is the rendering. I think right now for existing search results, we just try to render as a plain text. For the docs, we may use Markdown.
Okay, and so that brings a good point then. So if the search, basic or elastic, is able to return at least a snippet or the whole document, honestly, of that Markdown, we can then take a substring of the Markdown and just like put it in the search results. GitLab is able to render Markdown. We have components that do that, and so yeah, we could do that. We would just have to, the security comes into concern, just making sure that we're able to properly sanitize the Markdown before we, render some of it, right? Because if someone were to somehow put something malicious in there and then we're trying to render it, we just want to make sure that we do the proper stuff. I'm trying to think, and I think that we already do some stuff like that with some of the other search. Yeah, with code search, we do have some logic for code search to make sure, of course, that we're not executing code. We would just have to make sure that we kind of take a look at how code search is putting code on the screen, and maybe just do some of the same safety guards that code search does, and then rendering the Markdown as Markdown. that does add a little bit of complexity. So I guess just something to keep note of, maybe just a little bit, but still nothing like too terribly intense.
Gotcha. Just move that up a bit. Any other questions on that one before we move on? All makes sense.
I'm good.
And you felt like kind of like a few days, a week, maybe for that one. Like
that one's probably going to be that. So that one's probably going to be a little bit more than maybe like the labels as a facet, just because it's a whole entire new view, new tabs. We got to make sure that when we're rendering Markdown, we've never done that in a search result, so we need to explore that a little bit, make sure we do it the right way, the safe way, and then yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. This one I kind of skipped over because it was way up here towards the top of for effort, but exact and case sensitive searches. So this would essentially be adding some sort of toggle or ability to say that you wanted to do an exact search within the UI. And then I think most of the effort of actually like making sure that actually is being done is on the back end side. So from my expectations, the only part of this that would really be front end would be that essential toggle or indicator in the UI to do that.
Yeah, so on the front end right now, we pass the search case sensitive already back to the back end. We don't touch any of the casing. So like you could see that actually live if you were to go and like, if you type a search like all capitals, if you look in your URL, it will stay all capitals. So the back end takes that in. For the front end, it would be, for you, Nick, deciding where to put that checkbox. Mm-hmm. Using the GL form input checkbox component from Pajamas, which is, super simple, and then putting that where you said to put it, and then when it's checked, passing it along to the backend along with the search, and then letting the backend do all the work. So yeah, very, very little work on the front end for that.
Okay, cool. Let's see here. Additional metadata. So this is looking at adding some just additional things for code results, such as potentially adding an author, an updated date, stuff like that. And I'm just trying to get an idea of like maybe just looking at like doing one of those things. Like what are we looking at from like a front end perspective of adding that?
On the code search result?
Yeah, we just on like the result.
Are you thinking like maybe like just adding more below the card, like maybe authored by in like a face, or like are you trying to like having like some sort of like hovering over a line, like with the like what were you thinking there?
Yeah, I was thinking like below like the code blob is what I was kind of exploring when I was actually doing some design for this.
So if we're talking like below the code blob, basically outside of the code, but still in the code, like the result card. I know I keep calling it a card. I don't know if they're cards anymore, but the blob basically of the result. If we're talking like putting some metadata down at the bottom, very little complexity there. We have components for using for the user image. We have components for linking to a GitLab profile. We have all of those components already. Putting that on the blob on the search result at the in a new space, a new container basically inside the main container would be pretty straightforward. So front end wise, I would say low effort. Okay. If we're like a 1 day effort, like if that like started and finished in 1 day. Besides the reviews, if we're talking like trying to do something fancy like with like tooltips or like anything that involves the code blob itself, that's where things get tricky because as we've seen before, like the markup is insane. Like with that, like you have like a div with like 1,000 spans where every single character is in a different span, like things like that. So things get a little more tricky when we start messing with the actual code blob itself. But if we're talking, sorry, I'm rambling. But if we're talking a new container at the bottom, low effort.
Gotcha. Okay,
for sure.
Sounds good. I skipped over some of these down below. Okay, so I do want to mention we are kind of at the time that I'd set for this. I should have made it a little bit longer. Are you able to go over for a bit, like maybe to like 10, 15 more minutes, or do you have something right now?
I have time I can go over.
Okay. John and CZ, if you guys need to drop, is totally fine as well. Let's see here. Improve syntax discoverability. So this is one we're looking to, for first iteration, we're looking at adding just a modal that would be initiated from like a link on the page that just shows like a table of different syntax options and like what they provide essentially. I do have a design for this if that's helpful as well, but that's kind of like what we're thinking for first iteration.
If you could find it, if you could find the design quickly, that would be
Yep.
helpful just to kind of visualize what you're talking about.
Yep. So we haven't decided on the exact like placement of this, but some sort of link somewhere that when selected opens up a modal, our modal component that we have with our table component within it, showing some different examples and description of what those will do.
Cool. So my only question for this before I give an estimate is this something that we're wanting to give like non-engineers a way to like configure and change, or is this something that like we just want to kind of like throw in the code and then have it be kind of static? Or in other words, do we care to require a code change to update this modal with new content or new help text, or is it something that like we're wanting to be like easily configured by a non-technical user?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure how we would typically handle something like this. It'd be kind of nice, you know, if like a tech writer or something could have access to update some of these things as we like add additional syntax options or things ever change. But if that requires a significant effort, I don't know if it's maybe worth it than to just have it more like kind of hard coded or whatever, like you're mentioning.
So hard coded naturally is going to be super easy, right? You know, we just we add a modal, add the button that triggers the modal, and then have the thing rendered, and there you go. It would be interesting to explore if there would be some way that we could like plug in like a chunk of like help, like a help page or something that like, you know, like not necessarily iframe it, but like the idea of like maybe like having this like reference an actual like markdown help document somewhere.
Yeah, that was another thing I was actually considering. So like this is different than how we kind of outline these syntax options in our documents page. And I also have the idea this would even be a benefit to do on the docs page of actually showing it more in this manner versus like kind of written out as it is today. And so maybe if we did do that on the docs page, there's a way where we could essentially pull that information in.
Yeah, so
sure.
I wish I had a better answer. I'm not positive. It seems like something that probably could be done. It would be nice to see like if it's been done before. I guess to be more like to the point, as a first iteration, we could hard code it and then like add like a note to, hey, we should explore, you know, making this a little bit easier to, you know, change. Like for instance, if I was like freelancing something, like of course, like using something like Contentful or like using some sort of like CRM to like actually update this data would be cool. But like if we, like dog fooding wise, like if we could even like just link or somehow input a like a docs page, that would be cool too. So I would say maybe if we want to keep it low effort first iteration, this would be a great, honestly, starting issue for Tomas, like just to kind of a good introductory to like if we didn't add the caveat of like trying to add a help text, but like if we hard coded that, it would be a good starting issue for Tomas to explore like how we fire a modal with GitLab UI. It's a little interesting how some of those GitLab UI components work, and then how to like properly match a well-designed design mock from Unix. So yeah, so maybe that's like my 2 cents, but I think it's in a good place right now. Like it's probably a little bit more complex than moving the group project filters, but not much as a first iteration.
Gotcha. Okay. And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to start with it, you know, hard coded for like a first iteration to make it, you know, easy to get in there, and then we can improve it once we have it actually in. So yeah, you're thinking like kind of around here or maybe a little bit more?
No, I think that was probably good. It's not, okay. It's really not terribly too bad. It's just, you know, making sure the fonts are right and the spacing's right and all that.
Cool. Saved recent searches. This is one I was really interested in getting your thoughts on. So my initial assumption, and I guess to clarify, for the first iteration of this, I'm thinking of us just utilizing what is available on like the issues list and other things where we have like that recent searches.
Okay.
So not doing saved searches to begin, but just having the ability to have like recent searches that you could utilize. So I was curious of like how much of that is really just like kind of built into the component versus like needing to do any extra work to get that to function.
Yeah, I haven't used that component before. Could you go back to just the GitLab UI documentation just for a second, and then we just click the drop down?
This one.
Yeah, this way. Okay, so and it looks like we just pass array. So it looks like. So it looks like down in the history items, like in the props, it looks like we need to provide an array of history items. So I would have to look at like where tokenized search is, if that's tokenized search that's using that, where they're storing that information. Like, is it something that they're storing in local storage maybe?
Yeah.
Similar to how we do like your favorited groups, your recent groups and recent projects. Like if it's similar to that, that would be probably honestly how they're doing it. So I don't think complexity wise it's too hard. I would just also be curious. It looks like we have a slot. Yeah. So there's also okay. So I'm getting too technical, but I think this would be pretty cool, and I think we could actually store more than just the keyword search. We could store
like
everything.
Filters.
We could store everything if we wanted to. So what we would probably do from a technical side is we would store the URL. So when you fire a search, we would store the URL because the URL stores the entire query. It stores the groups, the projects, all that stuff. And along with any facets, and as we continue to add facets. So I believe that's what they're doing. And then we just have a custom little so see, and then they're actually building out, they're using a custom kind of computed thing that's computing like what to represent to you as the user. So they're saying, assignee, Nick Brandt, and then test, but really what's data is being stored is probably the URL search that you searched.
Gotcha.
So we could do the same exact thing. So yeah, this would be super cool to do. And I think medium effort, maybe a couple days, just because you'd have to make sure to get the local storage all set up. You'd have to, but I think the component would leverage most of this for us.
Gotcha.
So maybe like a 2-day effort, what I would say. Like I don't want to go as easy as say 1 day, but I don't want to say like multiple, like a ton of days either. So maybe just a little more complex than what you have it. But
and would we assume like the formatting would be similar to this? Like if it was like a group selected, it'd be like group : equals.
So they're building this text themselves. So we could add logic to basically however we wanted to represent this to the user, we could do it. There's no hard fast rule for this.
Okay.
We could see what it's doing out of the box, but I imagine we will probably have to add just a little bit of kind of like decision making of like how we want to like represent like the search back to the user. Yeah. But if it's something like, group : equals group name, comma, or maybe it looks like no comma here, and then like project : equals project name, or even project names if it's multi-select, and then we could even put like the scope and everything in there. Like it could be, well, we would actually probably have to put the scope in there.
Yeah.
Because we don't have an all scope right now. So yeah, it would also have to represent whatever scope they're on.
Okay.
As a recent search.
Yeah, it'd be cool to format a little nicer than kind of like what they do here.
Yeah.
But maybe we
have freedom to do whatever we want here.
Okay.
The last little thing I want to like ask a question on is, do we want to store recent searches like just as a whole, or like are we wanting to do like per scope recent searches? Because that's the one thing that like we'll have to decide on how we do that, because the scope is in the query parameter. So like if you were to like do some searches and then go to MRs and then click that drop down, the scope's going to be stored in there probably. So I mean, I guess we could omit the search if we didn't want the scope to be included. It would make things a little complicated though, like a lot more complicated.
I mean, I think as long as we show the scope in these options,
yeah,
and it's clear like the scope's going to change when you click on it, I think that's fine. And it'd probably be nice.
How does this one work? If you just like go to closed, go to closed on their tab. I'm just curious. We can do whatever we want, but so if we do closed. So they're omitting scope in their recent search.
Okay. Interesting.
Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily matter, but yeah. So
that's something to consider then. Okay.
Yeah, so there's something to consider that like in tokenized search, the behavior is that they're storing your tokens, but they're not storing your scope. So that way, like if you went to a different scope and then and they did a recent search, it would be all your tokens, but it would be on that tab rather than the previous tab. So that's the only thing. And I kind of want to take back what I said a little bit. It doesn't like omitting like the scope isn't going to like make the complexity that much. It just means that we'll have to really we'll have to make sure that we get it right when it comes to like manipulating the URL. But and we might have to do it that way anyway, because we might have to be careful about like like how much do we actually want to store in the recent search? Like, do we want to store, like, if we just take the raw URL, like, do we want to store like their sorting, choice? Do we want to store their, if they're doing confidential and close, like, do we want to store all those things, or are we just wanting to store group, project, and keyword? So,
gotcha.
A couple questions. All of those things, none of them really increase the complexity too much. I would maybe say just a little more complex than maybe where we have it. I would just maybe go up just a little bit.
Okay. Are they thinking like same level as maybe scopes as vertical tabs?
Yeah, maybe like that level. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple days work max. So.
Cool. Okay. Maybe if we can just get these last three done, and then if you have time outside of this session to kind of just review these and give any, like, move them up based on your thoughts, or if you have any questions, add comments, that would be awesome if you could do that.
Cool. Yeah, I can take a look at the left-hand side. Probably not today, but I will definitely this week.
Yeah, no rush, because like the ones we're going to be prioritizing in the near future are these ones on the right anyway. So like it's not at all a rush.
Cool.
Include scope in the navbar search. I know you've taken a look at this one before and kind of given some thoughts, but
yeah. So
go ahead.
I dropped some notes on this today too. I don't know if you had a chance to see those.
I did. I hadn't had time to respond yet, but I saw.
Totally fine. So we can talk about them now too. Do you want me to go ahead and voice them now?
Yeah, you had mentioned one thing of like having a separate issue to handle the expanding of the navbar, which I think makes a lot of sense, and we should probably do that, prior, like you had said in that issue. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what the other item that you had mentioned.
The other thing that, and it could be a no-op, but right now, so for our self-installed customers, if they don't have the feature flag turned on, they're still using the old header search. Okay. Whereas on .com, we're using a new header search, because we haven't made a determination of like if we want to go ahead and prioritize. I'm kind of running out of time before paternity leave and like my own capacities, but like deciding if we wanted to go ahead and remove the legacy code and remove the feature flag. A softer kind of solution is just to enable the feature flag by default in the code, so that way all of our self-install customers and the next milestone will start getting the new header search. And that just leaves us to delete the legacy code later. It seems like maybe, the biggest kind of like hurdle for deleting the legacy code is if there is a regression we missed, we have to revert. And then on top of that, like there's going to be QA specs that might break. So we'll probably have to baby a lot of like legacy like tests that we'll have to like touch. That could take some time. Okay. Which is why it's not as simple as like, oh, just go delete the old code. Because there might be stuff in our QA that is using the old, doesn't have the feature flag turned on. Not to say that like we can't flip it, it's just work to do it. So to full circle, what I'm trying to say is that like if we start like adding like specific like styles or stuff to make that search bar take the full nav, we have to be aware that we have to be careful that we either need to first get the legacy stuff gone, or just be aware that when we're doing this, we need to make sure that we ideally probably don't do that on the legacy header bar, if that makes sense. Like that, the old header search, unless it's very graceful and simple, we probably want to be careful about adding code that could affect both the header bars differently. Okay. I guess if I'm not talking too much in code here.
Yeah. So just to go back, were you suggesting that we then just enable the new header search for those self-managed customers like fairly soon, and that would essentially, and we only focus on doing this for the new header search? Is that correct, what you were saying?
Yeah, I think that if we wanted to like go the path of like least resistance and lowest risk, it would probably be to go ahead and turn the feature flag on for our self-install customers in the code. So you can enable feature flags by default. By doing that, it could also expose any issues with QA specs that we might expect to have. We fix all that, send that off in 14.8. If we don't hear anything from our customers, maybe 14.9, we talk about just deleting the legacy code and fully removing that feature flag from our code base. The reason I say that maybe mitigates some of the risk is because if there is, for whatever reason, it's been in production now for over a month and we haven't seen anything, right? But if for whatever reason something weird happened, we could just tell the support engineer, tell the customer, hey, just turn the feature flag off and you'll be fine. And then we can, when we delete the old code, then it makes it a little more difficult for the customer. The customer will have to make a patch to get that code back once we re-add it back.
Okay.
So getting that out of the way would just make it to where like now we can just solely focus on the enhancements to the new header search without worrying about messing with the old one accidentally, knowing that we might not see it because we're on our GDK, but like our self-install customer could get hurt by it and us not see it coming. But barring that, I do think that maybe we should break off the work for just focusing on like when you click on the header search, having it take the full top nav.
Yeah.
I think that is enough work and a high visibility change that maybe should be addressed first. That also takes a lot of the complexity out of this change, because this change, just showing the scope label, will be pretty low effort on the front end.
Okay.
After that change.
Cool. Yeah. So let's go into the assumption that we do that separately. And we're also only doing this for the new header search, and we're going to try and enable this for self-managed ahead of time. We're going to hold off on deleting the old code in case we need to revert for some reason. But yeah, we'll just focus the effort on this one based off of those things.
Yeah, based off those things, I would say this is probably about where it needs to be. It's just simply using GL badge. Again, as I probably like said it a lot of times, the UI is pretty good at knowing what state it's in, and so it will know when we're in a project scope, right? So like, and since option 1 is only saying, hey, in a project or in a group, it's not clearable. It's just there. It's just an informational badge. That's a super low effort, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Okay. And I do assume it's probably more than this issue though, for like moving group and projects filters, is that right?
Yeah, because that's a simple move. So I would say, maybe like, about right there.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for going over all that stuff. I know you kind of already said some of it in the issue. The last one that we'll cover here, fixed project group option consistency in the nav bar. This one actually should have. It's a very specific issue, and we've already actually gone over this before a bit. My assumption is it's a fairly low effort, and I know that there was some talk that it might also be handled by some of the backend work. But essentially, like if we look at like the drop down today for like project options, group options, how it's not the same layout that we have today in like the filters area, as well as there's an issue where these that the letter that we're using for this avatar or icon, whatever you want to call it, is actually not correct. It's supposed to be using the first letter of the actual project name, like C in this case. So that's what this issue essentially is working to resolve.
So a lot of that information is provided from our undocumented autocomplete endpoint, which if I've talked, I know I've brought it up before. I probably said it somewhere on this issue, kind of pointing towards it. So we have an undocumented autocomplete endpoint that is only intended for, it's an endpoint, but it's only really intended for internal customers or internal use by the UI. That is providing the information that we kind of need for the icon and stuff. So a lot of that will be fixing that on the back end and in the autocomplete, providing the autocomplete. I think it's been a little bit since I've looked at this, so I'm sorry if I'm wrong.
No worries.
But the autocomplete endpoint needs to provide that subgroup name. So right now, the autocomplete API just provides that full group name, like in one single string. So it'll provide gitlab.com/this/that, like is one super string. And we just look at that first character and we put it in the icon. Now, either on the front end or the back end, preferably probably the back end, because the back end probably knows and we don't have to make any assumptions. But on the front end, we could do some regex to just like find the last slash and then get that last subgroup name to get the icon letter. We could do that. But with regex, like there's always a risk that something weird happens and it matches wrong and we get something weird. It would probably be better because the backend that's building that endpoint probably is aware of the subgroup and will be able to just like create a new key in that endpoint and pass up the subgroup name, the lowest level group name or project name rather. And then we just change the key that the front end uses. And then the front end will then have the proper letter.
Gotcha. Okay.
So basically, I think a lot of the work, my preferred approach would be to fix a lot of this in the endpoint and then just change the data that the front end's referencing. So low effort on the front end, maybe I can't really speak to it, but maybe medium effort on the back end.
Gotcha. And then getting this stuff to be like the same layout as what we have like in other areas, is that based off of like that change on the back end as well? Or is that mostly just kind of like a front end update?
That's the one where it like, there's like ellipses or something. Is that what you're mentioning? I'm blanking a little bit.
Similar. Let me just show you like on our.
Yeah,
I know that I think it's in the menu too. Like,
I know that we did it, but I'm blanking on it now.
Like these options, you know how we have like the name of the group first and then like the path below, like you see here.
Mm-hmm.
And then on our actual search, it's just the entire string versus like.
Yeah. So similar to what I was saying about getting that like that focused like subgroup name, we can do this. We need to look at how our groups and our projects endpoint is delivering that data, and just also do that in the autocomplete endpoint. So the funny thing is that the autocomplete endpoint is referencing the same data as the groups and project endpoints. It's just not providing it in the same fashion. So we just need to look at the group and projects endpoint. How are they delivering the data for the identicon, the project name, and the path name?
Mm-hmm.
It literally will be copy and paste. Bring that, because the autocomplete's in the same space. The autocomplete has access to the same data, and then just honestly just update to the same. What's nice is that since this is an undocumented endpoint, we're not and I don't think anyone should be using it for any of their. I mean, I guess like someone could be, but since it's not documented, we're not necessarily required to keep it the same. We can update it in a milestone if we want to. So because it's not one of our V4 endpoints, we're not under the same versioning restraints as our actual API. So we could, since this is intended for an internal usage only, we're not like we can update this however we want, I guess is what I'm saying.
Gotcha. And that's primarily like backend work that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
So that'll be moving, just looking at those backend APIs, mimicking the logic onto the autocomplete undocumented endpoint. And then, and then on the front end, the only change on the front end will be just to change the keys. And then, also maybe look at how we're representing it in groups and projects, and then just copying that code over too. So a lot of copying code in different places and like just kind of updating it. I know that sounds really simple. It's maybe a little more complex than that, but really not that much effort. I would say where it's at is probably pretty good. Okay.
Because I think they moved it here based off of it being a little bit of front end or back end work. And you're saying it's not going to be hardly anything on the front end. Maybe just a tiny bit, but yeah. Cool. Okay. That looks good. All right. Yeah. So I appreciate you taking the time, Zach, to go through this with me. I know you're not even, on like helping out the global search team right now. You got other things you're trying to finish up before you go on leave. So I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to do this with us.
And I guess to give you guys full transparency, since we have the team here too, Nick and my expectation is that like I want to be stable counterparts for this team. And so whereas maybe I'm not actively contributing at an engineering level, I still am and want to be here at a like higher level when I can, to where I can come and talk through some of this stuff with everyone. So don't feel like it's, that you're doing something wrong by like taking my time. This is part of the reason why I am here. So
awesome.
So I anytime you guys need, feel free to ping me. I know that sometimes I'm a little slow to come back around, but I try not to forget things as best I can. But no, I think I have a pretty good understanding of the global search front end at this point, and it would be a crime, I think, to not help out where I can. So.
Yeah, and I guess that goes beyond the maintainer reviews.
Yeah.
Right, because I would assume that we get to reference you as or request you when necessary for a maintainer review for some of these areas, since you're pretty.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that like Terry and Dimitri have both been good about like whenever they do there's front end changes, like they typically at me just to kind of get my thoughts. Please communicate to the team that like please continue doing that, and I'll talk to Tomas and explain that like anytime that you think that it would be nice to have me come take a look at the code, please do. I have the context, and I can sometimes, hopefully, if there's any gotchas, I can hopefully catch them. So
yeah, that's really great. It's good to hear.
So yeah, I'm here as much as I can be. I will be gone. Nick has if anyone's interested, just ping me after this. I have my paternity leave typed out like in a consumable format. I've shared it with like Nick and Sung Jun on our team, but if either of you would like to, if any of you would like to know like kind of when I'm here and when I'm not, just as far as the baby and stuff, feel free to ping me. I'll send you the kind of the breakdown of my time off. So
cool.
But yeah,
awesome.
While I'm
Thanks,
here,
Zach.
I will try to be as here as I can be. So
cool.
Awesome.
We appreciate it. Yeah. So whenever you have a chance to go through that, like I said, there's no rush at all on these other items. If you have any questions, feel free to ping me or anyone else on the team if it's related to like backend stuff. But yeah, if there's nothing else, I think that's about it for today.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for taking the time to do all this exercise. This is really cool. I'm actually planning on sharing this with Nick and Sung Jun because
Awesome.
this is a cool format to kind of break stuff down. So good job.
Hey, appreciate it. Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Have a good week.
All right, you all too.
Thanks.
Yep.
Good seeing you again.
Mm-hmm.